Today, I've got Adrian Matthews on the podcast. Hi. Welcome
Hello.
to the show. How are you?
I'm very well.
Cool. Now, you've got an interesting abode there, haven't you?
Yeah.
We better just cover this before we do anything else. Go on. Tell me.
Yeah, well, I live in a place called Pandy Farm, which is in North Wales. We kind of the people who run it kind of offer a workaway situation. So I'm kind of here 25 hours a week, 25 hours a day, a week working.
Yeah.
For free board and accommodation and food and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
that's kind of the situation. I suppose probably people can't see it in the podcast, but it's a caravan effectively with a couple of shodo kanji and few nice windows looking out into a nice forest. So yeah, that's what it is.
So you're technically a woofer, are you? Is that what they call it?
Technically, yeah.
Is that what it is? I never knew what woofer stood for, actually.
Yeah, in my old days when I was in the monastery, it used to be called a Dharma bum.
Okay, so we've got to do the traditional first question because we're already going down a rabbit hole here. So what do you do?
I dig holes primarily. I think that's my job, on both many levels. I suppose it was like what I do now is not what I was going to do. I was training to be, a psychotherapist or a psychoanalyst. That was my raison d'etre as a young kid. But as I say, stuff happened, and I kind of ended up here. And weirdly enough, the older I've gotten, the more I've come to realize that that type of ideal or that type of notion that you get when you're a kid, you say, I want to be this, is very often problematic, if you understand me.
Yes, I do. Yeah, I do. Just some. That's a bit weird. Yeah, carry on. Sorry about that.
No.
Yeah. I mean, that sort of stuff. This is interesting because there's a theme that runs through, obviously, a lot of people's stories, that they're sort of aware of some sort of interest or calling to something early on. There's a fascination that they have about something, which then sort of starts to manifest in another way as they get older, but not in all cases. So tell me, this sort of interest in psychotherapy, when would you say you got interested in that to start with? Because I think that's an interesting point to sort of look at.
I guess as a kid, I mean, I suppose as a young lad, I was always kind of going off to meetings of a small Freudian group that kind of met in my local area. Well, not kid, I was about 12 or 13, and I kind of...
Well, that's young.
Oh, well, I can't remember.
That's young to be going off to a Freudian group. That's amazing. Yeah, okay.
I don't know, was I 12? I might have been 13 or 14. My dad probably would be able to give me the exact date. But it was funny because the group that we met, we kind of met in an old Quaker hall. Suppose the deal was that we could talk about Freudian analysis, but we couldn't be critical of Christianity too much. So there was always kind of a cultish element to the whole kind of meeting, I guess I always love that in a very weird paradoxical way, because I'm not, in any way someone who loves empire, but I love that sense of 1890s Vienna, that era of Austro-Hungarian Empire, the era of where there was a certain kind of grandesque majesty to it all. You could almost feel like each nation was inspirited in a way that they aren't right now. So that's what kind of, at the end of the whole kind of process of me kind of coming to the idea was I was in this group and I had this real deep sense of something grand or great or archetypal in a way. Yeah, that's how I kind of got into it, I suppose.
Oh, that's interesting, because there are parallels with, obviously, like Vienna and the sort of psychotherapy movement, people interested in the mind, and this sort of late Victorian, early Edwardian thing going on in London, where you've got these characters who are sort of interested in ancient, more classics, and the spin-off of that, what they could discover about the mind, and also a fascination in this country with things that were Oriental. And I think it does come out of some sort of grandeur, that people have got the money that they can not have to work and spend time thinking about stuff. So yeah, I think there is an interesting point there, that we sort of forget, don't we? Unless that you need a certain sort of how could you put it, decadence, I suppose.
Yeah, I think so. But there's a story about Freud when he went to the necropolis, I think it's called, in Greece, and he had been gearing up to go to it. And this is 1890 or early 1900s, where you just didn't get on Ryanair and flew out somewhere. And he arrives at the necropolis and gets this real deep sense of disappointment, because he's built up this ideal, this notion of some sort of bastion of Greek sensibility or traditionalism, and he arrives totally disappointed because what he was expecting wasn't there. And that was kind of, in my sense, when I arrived just to start doing my own client work, I arrived at that point kind of going, this is not what it was meant to be, in a way.
That's interesting, isn't it? That is interesting. Because obviously when he arrived there, it would have been just a bit of a shell of a building, because it had only recently blown up, because I think they stored ammunition in there or something, didn't they? The Turks did or something, and it blew up. So and it's not that, okay, it's big in ancient standards, I guess, but in your own mind, it's not the sort of colossus, is it? It's not that sort of, I'm mixing ancient metaphors here, but you know what I mean? It's obviously a lot sort of smaller, and the circumstances of what he would have found in Athens would have been nothing like what he would have thought of the culture. So when you sort of went to I'm assuming that you were studying it, but beforehand, but when do you get to that point that you get a little bit disillusioned about it?
Well, that's the question. That's kind of it. That's a complicated answer, really. I guess if you wanted my critique about the point that I had arrived at, is that psychotherapy or that counseling world, and I've had a few chats with a few counselors who've kind of if not confirmed, but kind of understood my hesitation of the direction, is that it's become highly medicalized, and mental health, it's put in the same bracket as physical health. So there's this abstract ideal of the perfectly healthy individual. I mean, if you go to any website that says that, don't drink this much, meditate every day, have a good social friends, and blah, blah, common sense kind of stuff. But in an ontological sense, that type of entity doesn't really exist. No. So when I was going into that world, that idea of trying to bring someone towards that place was kind of ingrained in a way. And also Freud, Jung, and Adler, and all those kind of psychoanalysts were pretty clued into the idea of the individual within the state and the individual within a hierarchy. and very much in the counseling world, you embed yourself within a hierarchy. You know, you're within an association, and it was David Freud and Jung. I'm not saying that, but the auspices of the state are far more prevalent these days. So you end up becoming going into counseling because something's wrong with your work life, or there's something wrong with your health, that you're not functioning in a way that's productive. And that kind of I'm not truly a socialist in that sense, but that idea of counseling and psychotherapy being something more than just gaining functionality back, I think is gone for a lot of people in the working.
Yes. Yeah, I agree with you, because I can see that in a broader picture, that ironically, the thing that's trying to fix a part of somebody's, how can I put this, consciousness and their connectivity to the world and understanding their self has been sort of commoditized by another part of the brain that wants to sort of rationalize everything. And it's not the case of the rationalizing, it's the case of the bean counter. So, you know, I see that, and I've often made comment about this, about, you know, music education. Because if you want to learn a musical instrument, particularly like contemporary musical instruments, all these, the people that really made something happen, in fact, took it away from, if I sort of wind back a bit, you know, obviously the guitar was about, and there were great guitarists about, but you know, somebody turns up and starts playing an instrument in a different way, not one that's been, it's not structured in any shape or form by, you know, education, and suddenly something exciting and new happens. But now, of course, what's happened is that we go and learn, we're taught the note for note what somebody like, you know, some of these early players, you know, Carl Perkins or Jimi Hendrix or, you know, anybody, Hank Marvin, what they did, whereas these guys probably worked it out by ear.
Yeah.
You know, and you think, well, that's sort of strange, because going back to what you're saying about, you know, how can somebody become, like, it's all being geared up to somebody being productive. Again, it's that sort of, you know, let's make them a good accountant again.
Yeah.
Because, you know, we need more accountants. We have many more beans to count.
Yeah.
Then wondering what the hell are these beans and why are we doing this?
Yeah.
Because again, I would have thought, well, perhaps we will come across this as we talk. But I think as soon as you really understand yourself, it actually messes things up.
It does. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's funny the way you put that. I mean, you know, I think because I've hung around a lot of Buddhists as well, and the same thing happens in Western Buddhism to a degree, where it becomes almost a part of the state in a way. I was at a conference a while ago back, and one of the messages was that we as a unity need to come up with a common identifier so that we can have a relationship with the state. And I'm not presenting this as kind of an anarchist, because I'm not really an anarchist, because I don't really have enough time on my hands to do all this kind of stuff. But I think there's kind of stages to this process where you go through the mill, you come out the mill, you end up trying to bring a message to the world doesn't listen. Then you kind of go, okay, well, what can I do now? Or I can just go harvest the potatoes or something like that. I don't, like, I'm not, I find that often when people come to a certain realization, and people who have very profound insight, that can often lead them down the river to some places which are not particularly healthy or particularly conducive to even dysfunctioning within the group. Because it's all right seeing, you know, Christ the Redeemer on top of the hill, but if you're coming down and you're telling everyone that we need to burn all the cabbages, because that's what Christ told us to do.
Yeah.
That's the part where I often have a critique about anarchism, is that it gets so individualized to the point where that type of future you want, that idealized solar punk idea, you can't function within society at all. At least that's what I observed in some people, from my background a couple of years ago back.
There's a lot of stuff there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a habit of not answering questions, by the way.
No. This is really cool. Because you see, as far as I'm, you know, this podcast's about creativity, right? And to be honest, it's all about thinking and experiencing life and stuff like that. So these questions that are maybe unanswerable are important, because as soon as you start to open yourself up to those type of things, it makes you see the world in a different way, right?
Yeah.
And you saying that about the thing about Buddhism, I think is quite interesting. Out of all of the type of religions, right?
Yeah.
That sort of statement about, well, we need a unique selling proposition, guys. Yeah. We need to get our stuff together to do that. It seems to be rather not even Buddhist. I mean, it's completely not, you know. But I get the point, you know, that obviously they need to survive in the material world and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
But as you say, those things that you start to discover about yourself makes it really difficult to operate within the world, because initially, when you have those insights, it puts you at odds with the world that you've been experiencing.
Oh.
And I've seen this a lot with people who have some extreme experience where they definitely need plenty of time to land before they start telling people, you know, their experiences, because otherwise it just ends up being, as you say, like the sort of revelation. You know, I've had a revelation about how we should plant our cucumbers and cabbages, you know. And I think that's, you know, probably why, like, obviously the early people probably had it sorted when they just went off into the desert and stayed there, or whatever they did. Didn't bother anyone else.
No.
Unless you wanted to find out, and you go and seek them out, right? So that's an interesting point, that you know, the sort of the world of psychotherapy and just knowing yourself from that perspective fits into, because I've never really pondered this actually, about what would a Jungian or Freudian think about somebody who's in therapy that suddenly, or is just going to see somebody that suddenly has a breakthrough moment and they realise, oh my God, I don't like any of this.
And not only
what's the fallback position?
And not only do you not like the world that you're in, not only do you like your wife and spouse, you don't even like the therapist, and you recognise that sometimes, okay, I'm being led down the garden wall here, garden path down here.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. I've always considered, it's like, and I probably would be, as you can tell by the accent, I'm not from the United Kingdom, but I can tell you some things that if I said I believe psychotherapy is merely a sticking plaster to a certain point in the future, there's a lot of people back home who would be bringing me down to the Catholic Church and dunking me into the confessional, saying repent.
Yes, because all these things become a religion of their own sort, don't they? With a dogma, you know. And you know, that psychotherapy is religion. It's what you believe about music. You know, it's what you believe about art. You know, that's not art. My goodness, the world's going to the dogs. You know, and that sort of thing. They get this sort of idea that that's their little sort of utopia. I tell you a little story actually about that. I think it's quite interesting. We went and lived in a intentional community. a little while ago, a few years back. And it was an interesting idea, this place had been a hospital, with massive grounds and stuff like that. And it was turned into this sort of community of different buildings and, people own different houses and all this. And on the face of it, you think, what a great idea.
Yeah.
What a brilliant idea. When you get into it, though,
Yeah.
it was pretty dire.
Yeah.
Because everybody had their own idea of utopia.
Yeah.
You see.
Yeah.
And what I sort of thought about this, in sort of retrospect, is that communities don't start like that. They don't start with somebody, unless you get, of course, some sort of religious community where people were drawn in by some charismatic character, which could obviously have a similar effect. And there are lots of cases of those going badly, But it was the fact that people had this wonderful idea about what they were going to be doing. But then, of course, one of your neighbours doesn't have quite the same idea as you.
Yeah. It's funny. I want to say something slightly heretical here, but one of the intellectuals who was very informative in my thought was the journalist Peter Hitchens. Not necessarily because I agree with him, but I've always found his way of thinking rather, because I think there's a lot of talk in our kind of communities about collapse and degrowth and stuff like that. But Hitchens was one of the first, but not the one of the first people, one of the first kind of conservative people within that kind of whole spectrum of public debate to kind of come out with a book of Abolition of Britain, to realize that, okay, he's coming from the idea that the cultural and social framework of the country has been torn apart by radical, liberals in the Labour Party, and that's his belief. But he's right in the sense that the world that we're living in now is crumbling from the inside out, and that always kind of reminds me of another conservative, the late Pope Ratzinger, saying that the walls of materialism crumble from the interior outwards, because he speaks of the bunker of materialism, and the bunker of materialism effectively crumbles from the inside out.
Yeah, I get that.
Speaking of utopia, one of the quotes I always liked about Hitchens was, utopia is reached over a river of blood and you don't get there. So if you take utopia out of the equation, just have a community, you don't have to worry about getting anywhere.
Exactly, that's it. So what I was going to say is that, if you get communities, normally they happen by sort of happenstance. Somebody pitches up and somebody else pitches up, and it just happens that this person is good at, I don't know, making smithying or something, and somebody else is quite good at doing something else. And then it starts to develop because you need one another. Not because you want to need one another, or you want to live in this lovely little spot. It just happens to be the place that you've ended up in. So having no plan is often a good thing. Certainly when it comes to because things develop on their own. But as I say, as soon as people start to plan it in that, we're going to do this, and this is the sort of sacred ground, the virgin ground that we're going to use, blah blah blah, and it doesn't sort of have any of this sort of hickledy-pickledy thing going on. And I think so that idea of a utopia is deeply problematic.
Well, it's a Christianized ideal in a way. It's a bit of theology here, but it's a more, the kingdom of God is something. It's something that is promised to mankind. There's probably a couple of traditional Catholics who are going to be really angry when they hear this, but there's an idea.
Don't let them know.
Well, I am one, in a weird way. There's an old Dara Bryn joke that says, I'm an atheist, still Catholic.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. I get that. Yeah.
But,
and it does sound better in an Irish accent, I must say, that statement. Awesome. Let's go back to this thing, because you were saying that you got sort of disillusioned with, well, not so much disillusioned. It wasn't quite what you wanted. So what was your next port of call? What was the next thing that you started to look at? Because you've already mentioned Buddhism, okay? So we know there's other things going on here.
Yeah.
So where did you go? What was the next point when you started looking at this and thinking, well, because it still obviously informs your thinking a lot, especially Freud, doesn't it? So what was the next port?
Well, I guess here, really, I mean, I kind of finished up with my whole kind of life in that world back in May 2022. But I guess I really stopped being in that world when maybe 2018, 2019, when I first started to go into my training, because the image had broken. So in an odd way, there was this kind of, time loop situation where I was kind of progressing with my course, but I was reading all about with John McGreer. I was reading a lot of stuff about what we call degrowth and collapse, and stuff that was tangential to that kind of line of progression towards some sort of ornate kingdom of God in the future. So effectively, I ended up with a situation where I reached a point of total mental fatigue around 2022, I think it was. And I just remember not being able to function for about 3 or 4 months. Honestly, I was just when people speak about mental illness, they often kind of abstract it out into some sort of thing that's over here you don't know about. But when one is being moved by something, and I kind of like the idea of destructive forces in a way, because they have an essence to themselves. They have a point to them. But when you're in that, you really are caught up as something that you can't really move out of unless people either come in and help you navigate the tides, or the river brings you somewhere else, I guess. So it was kind of, psychotherapy, that whole world, and my whole literal framework collapsing entirely. And then ending up, getting a text off a lady in a farm over here saying, would you like to come work for us? So it was, and it's been very weird in a sense, because ever since I've landed here, even though things are kind of crazy all the time and everyone's kind of going mad, it flows in a very odd way. Things kind of just unnaturally unraveling and unveiling themselves in a weird way, which I kind of love. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, it does, actually. It does. It's that thing of, well, first of all, letting go of what you think you're in control of.
Yeah.
And then as you do that, you realize you weren't in control of it anyway.
Yeah.
Right. It was just an illusion that you had control of the stuff. And this often happens, doesn't it, with illness, right? So you're doing your thing, and then suddenly you're not well. And that could just literally be a cold or whatever, or the flu. And of course, once you sort of step back and think, well, hang on a minute, maybe it's not a case of me catching something. Maybe it's the fact that my body's just went, hang on a minute, hang on, let's just stop for a moment. And once I felt this myself. Once I've accepted that as a possibility, that you can't just keep going and going and going, because something will stop you. Your body will go, right, that's it. And that, of course, is as true with what we could, as you say, you put as mental illness, right? It's not anything more than maybe, well, I'm not saying it's not anything more than, but in some cases it can be that moment where it goes, hang on, just need to stop here. And then you get those things that come out of that. I think a lot of people would go, yeah, this was strange how this happened, because I met, like you're saying, you got that text message or email from somebody saying, "Why did you come over and work over here?" Right, and it's that sort of thing where you just accidentally meet somebody or accidentally read something, that in that moment is exactly what's required. So, and I think that's quite. This is another recurring theme that happens on this podcast. The sort of accidental meetings, the coincidences that are transformational. So you've ended up in Wales, right? Have you ever been to Wales before?
Oh yeah, a long time ago.
Yeah, okay. So you're familiar with it. Did you find that helped straight away, or did you have this sort of moment of, did it get worse, or did you get this sort of decompression thing going?
Well, I wouldn't call it decompression. I would call it being thrown into the tumble dryer and being spun around underneath the cycle.
Yeah.
With a dryer function for about 4 or 5 hours and multiply that out. I see. I'm bitter. Inherently, I have my father's stubbornness and my mother's compassion, but I will kind of struggle. Well, not struggle. I will kind of go through things because I guess I framed it like this: is that when you are called for something. So let's be slightly archetypal here and be Jungian and whatever.
Let's do that.
If you're called on the hero's journey to do something, and being a pacifist, I don't carry a sword, I carry a shovel, I guess now. Which we could call the
that can be quite deadly, shovels.
It can be.
Exactly.
This is called the chalice at the moment. So you're the chalice giver, you're bringing the water, you're bringing the sucker, you're bringing life, something. I guess that when you're in an environment like this, so I grew up in quite a suburban area in Dublin, Dunleary, effectively, which is a suburb. It used to be called Kingstown, effectively. It was where, a bit of Irish history here, is where the British soldiers land to go into Dublin City to fight the rebels in 1916. So it's real Anglo-British territory in a weird way for them. So that was my life in a kind of quasi Anglo-Irish suburban lifestyle that was very managed and very manicured in a way. Not necessarily because of any stuff in my family, but just because that's how it was. But when I transitioned over to here, where things are just it's like you have a car engine and everything is not screwed in exactly. Everything kind of shakes and shivels and wobbles, but yet the car goes smoothly. But in Dublin City, it stops and starts, it stops and starts, it stops and starts, it stops and starts, and everything's all managed. In a way, it's kind of a bit of a wild hunt here, because everything just kind of is a bit manic, And I guess that manic, if you wanted to be slightly psychoanalytic about it, that manicness, that dirtiness, that craziness was something that my psyche needed to ingest to kind of come to homeostasis in a way.
Yeah, I get that. I get that. Because that's what, as a really good metaphor, we were talking about the sort of biome, the gut flora and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
The fact that we don't eat any dirt is not good.
No.
We don't get dirt off carrots. Everything is sort of cleaned and all the rest of it. But of course, there are sort of things pointing to the fact now that actually that we need to ingest a bit of, as you say, sort of dirt.
Yeah.
And as a metaphor, that sort of that works in that thing that you're saying about if you're in an environment where it's all heady, everything's managed, everything's planned.
Yeah.
After a while, you're not getting everything that you need. You need that craziness, that stuff where you're connected to
to
nature in some sort of shape or form. Because, otherwise, this idea that we're not part of it, it's bonkers, isn't it? Really?
Well, from ashes to ashes to dirt, I guess. I mean,
yes, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, so okay, we've got this. What you're doing now is obviously different from what you were doing before. Are you sort of settled into that now?
Yeah. I mean,
because you seem very relaxed.
Well, I mean, there's some situations where I'm chasing after a few chickens, and it's like, oh, holy God!
Oh my God! Yeah, I know.
Oh
yeah, I know what that's like. As a boy, I was always chasing chickens.
Yeah, and not speaking after. Well, yeah, that's.
Or being attacked by a cockerel.
Oh God! Yeah, we've had a few cockerels on the farm. Yeah, noisy buggers. Anyway, yeah.
Sorry, I've diverted your line of thought.
Yeah.
Now, I'm sure, because obviously we met a week ago, really.
Yeah, effectively, yeah.
And so I sort of come over to the wild side in Wales, and Richard, who's been on the program, sort of interviewing me weirdly. He said, I don't know how quite we got onto the subject. It might have even been Steve. But he said, you really must talk about Harry Potter.
Oh, yeah.
Now, I do think this is an interesting thing because there's so many layers to this.
Yeah.
How do you... Because you've got a few things that you're really into, the sort of Japanese comics type thing.
Manga, yeah.
Yeah, manga.
Yeah.
And I noticed that your little icon thing was some sort of manga character, wasn't it? So you got that. And we were talking about some podcasts that I've been listening to, J.K. Rowling, but you knew a lot more about Harry Potter than I did.
Yeah.
Now, there were lots of things that came up in conversation which I thought were interesting about sort of messages about society and stuff that are buried in that book. Because interestingly, it's always given a bit of a bad rap now, as if it's just a children's book, which it is just a children's book. But weirdly, it's far more potent than just a children's book. So let's. I'm assuming that you're somebody who read the Harry Potter stuff as you were growing up.
As gospel.
That's exactly what I'm getting at now. I wanted you to say that, not me, right? Okay, so how did it impact you personally?
How did it impact me? Okay. Well, here's the thing. So there was kind of stages of it. So I think before I was at a good reading age, I think my father read it out to me, which was good for him because he was, in a way, trying to relearn how to read and write. So that was great experience for him. And I always remember book 5, which is The Order of the Phoenix, because Professor Umbridge, and that always, and you kind of see where I'm going to go with this.
Yes.
Umbridge, as it firstly is the word, taking umbrage with something.
Yes.
I remember being in the bus back home and the 46A coming back home at one point, and there was this guy in front of me who wasn't wearing his mask correctly, and I remember seeing this woman just looking at him, staring at him. How dare you wear your mask with your nose exposed as opposed to over. And this was like in the summer of 2022, so the kind of pandemic had been kind of gone through the system, thankfully. And I just was going to go, why is that? So that's the kind of idea of Umbridge as a character, because she's someone who, and in some way, J.K. Rowling has fallen foul of a lot of people who are taking umbrage of her.
Yes. Yes.
The idea that, and this doesn't have to be a woman, but the idea that there's a type of person who is a smiling assassin in a way, who gets in there, is very good at working greasy pole and can make their way up.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't like, well, actually, I do comment on British politics, but I don't vote in them. But I always notice this parallel that kind of goes on with British politics, where you have the greasy pole, and people accept there's a greasy pole, and yet people still partake in this debate of saying one crowd is better than the other crowd. But when you recognize that behind, the leader of the Labour Party and the leader of the Tory Party, who I'm sure are kind of decent family men and probably good individuals, at least at home as a character, irrespective of their policy and political stances, there are a lot of Umbridges behind those people who are not necessarily in charge, who are not the Minister for Magic, but who have a lot of sway, as the Grand Inquisitor, I think, was Umbridge.
Yes.
Name in the Harry Potter books. And what was fascinating is that a lot of people in Slytherin House were adopted by her to become her enforcers. And this is the weird idea, of kids being used by the state, wrongly, incorrectly. So there's a power of coercion element to that as well, where a kid is given power over other kids, and in any situation that ends up, you effectively becoming a Death Eater, as happened to Malfoy.
Yes. Yeah. Yes, absolutely. What seems to be coming through now is and I think this is true for a lot of people who are involved in the arts.
Yeah.
Their art actually tells their story, in some cases, as a prediction ahead of time. Because there are so many elements in the Harry Potter trilogy that is actually J.K. Rowling's story.
Yeah.
It's also the story of society and what is actually beginning to happen and transform. And you see it in lots of things. I mean, Alan Moore's V for Vendetta is a good example of that. And he actually pointed out that the surveillance camera thing, he'd written about this before the surveillance cameras were up, right? And it, it's a sort of a shrug of the shoulders. And, well, that's, but I also think the fact that they all end up wearing masks at the end is another one. It's quite okay. But there's a lot of that.
On that, very quickly, tangential, the masks in V for Vendetta were masks of anonymity.
Yes.
The masks of the last, in a way, they were masks. You weren't able to see who you are.
No.
But the masks of the last 20 and the last 2 or 3 years, albeit being medical health interventions and probably proper in that sense, they were, covering your mouth.
Yeah, and also you couldn't see who the people were.
Yeah, exactly.
I know. It's interesting. So let's go back to Mr. Potter. Okay, so there are lots of things in there.
Yes.
And I've always, because obviously I interview a lot of people who are involved in in the world of sort of magical thinking. And generally speaking, a lot of people don't like the Potter books.
Yeah.
But in actual fact, I look at those and think these are absolutely jam-packed with all sorts of stuff, I had, when somebody was doing the draft read for the book that I've just been doing, she was somebody who grew up with the Harry Potter books, and that got her into writing, right?
Good.
And I actually put in there an NLP technique of dealing with sort of phobias. And it's called the swish technique, where you use a lot of auditory cues and stuff like that. And the visual thing is that the thing that you're concerned about sort of squidges down and is replaced by something else really quickly.
Yeah.
But I did a a little bit of a spin on this, and she put in when she was doing this sort of draft read, put a little comment. That's exactly the same way that they get rid of the, what was it, not the boggle, what's
Boggart.
it called, the boggart.
Yeah, ridiculous.
It was like, yeah, and saying that and all that sort of thing of changing your imagination of what this thing is.
Yeah,
and you go, yeah, that's the point. She's done lots of research here, and it's not just something she's made up. Well, there is an element of what she makes up, obviously, but it's not just based on nothing. So to have people to turn around and go, well, just sort of dismiss it, even when they're in they have a sort of a magical worldview.
Yeah,
it's quite interesting. You sort of go, well, I think this is a usable book. It's a usable.
The question to ask is, what are they dismissing? Are they dismissing the people who are reading them, or are they dismissing the books? Like,
I actually think there might be something, and slightly, and on a tangent to that, which is, do they feel that it makes what they believe in not feel so important?
Well, probably, yeah. I mean, I think,
and that's sorry.
No, I know. I think, well, okay. Well, what do we believe is a kind of very difficult subject to parse out.
Yeah, of course it is. Yeah.
Because what we think we believe is not often what we believe. Like I think I believe that I like Irish rugby to win every single year, but actually I don't. I only do it because if I happen to be around a group of English rugby fans, I just do it because it's the Irish thing to do. You want to beat the English, Of
course you do. So there's that's a good metaphor, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's not the thing that you state. There's something that's running concurrent with that is the real motivator.
And I think what's fascinating, and we just addressed the elephant in the corner with J.K. Rowling and her views amongst trans people, and just accept the fact that she has a certain point of view, and some of us agree, some of us differ, and blah 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 blah. But just take the idea that someone puts their own political belief or human right belief or whatever, just put it in the box, and he put that before that childhood wonder and imagination of the book. Now that's a Faustian bargain in my head.
Yeah.
Some people even say, okay, I can bracket J.K. Rowling and I can keep the magic of the book, and that's fine. But when people cannot read the book because they just see J.K. Rowling's belief on a very narrow position on human rights or trans rights, that for me is the interesting part, because what's happening there, what's happening in that person's imagination, it basically means is that they are, this is my interpretation, so everyone might have a different view, is that they give priority to their belief structure over their imagination, the epiphenomena of their imagination. And even on a very subtle level, that means that no matter what you imagine will always be influenced by your belief structure. You can never become totally amorphous or void to your belief structure. We all have one. But it's when you read that into everything, and the idea of kind of a communist Marxist idea, which I really dislike, is like everything is political. Everything doesn't have to be political. And and because then you can reduce. It's actually reductionism in a weird way. You reduce everything down, and I always think the remedy to this is, we have to understand that there's the Harry Potter franchise, there's the books, there's the movies, there's the Emma Watson and Daniel Radcliffe, Rupert Griffith, the whole cast, and that's one thing. But the actual, even if it's a purely fictional metaphysical existence of the universe inside your head, that it's just there inside your head, that's more precious. That you shouldn't get rid of that, because that's your childhood in a way. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I agree with you. I agree with you. There's a couple of things you were saying there, about beliefs and your imagination. I mean, your beliefs really are based on your imagination because, I mean, when you study what you believe in,
Yeah.
then you realize a lot of it is nonsense,
Yeah.
A lot of it's not what you've acquired. It's something you've been told. It's not being necessarily acquired through experience.
Yeah.
And even something that's acquired through experience has been subject to your interpretation because of what somebody's told you and all the rest of it. But the other thing that came, because the thing that I mentioned was I'd listened to this fabulous podcast called The Witch Trials of J.K. Rowling. And it was on sort of the multi levels of literally witch trials of like Salem, and what that these people were like highly educated, very literate. It was one of the most literate communities of its time, and lots of these people were lawyers who were accusing one another of witchcraft, right? And of course, the parallels were astonishing with this story. The fact that what Rowling was actually saying was not what people thought she was saying became very clear. Of course, if you sort of dipped into it, you could assume that she was coming from a certain viewpoint, but that was your own assumptions, Then on the other side of it was that some of the people that had sort of come out and were irritated by her, their stories were interesting because there was another layer of things that you wouldn't necessarily have picked up on, which were, sort of validated some of their concerns.
Yeah.
So it wasn't that there was like this side was right and this side was wrong.
No.
But the main point that came out of this particular thing was the thing about free speech. That you can't just, however much you don't want to hear somebody else's viewpoint because it's not palatable, that doesn't mean to say they shouldn't be able to say it. And I think what's happened is that this stuff that happens on social media, and social media is like the town square.
Yeah.
If you went out in the town square at any period of time and shouted something that was heretical or was against, the monarchy or against government or whatever, at any period of time, you would have been in deep trouble.
Yeah.
But of course, so much now is like the town square. So as soon as you get on to social media and make a statement, they're asking for trouble, potentially.
For me, when the whole comes to the whole free speech debate, and it's not necessarily criticism of those proponents of it, is that there's a very British and American centric viewpoint of this. So like for say, but going back in Ireland, for 50, 60 years, there used to be this rule that there was 3 pillars of our society. It was the Catholic Church, it was Fianna Fáil, and it was the GAA, the Gaelic Athletic Association. So there wasn't no free speech. Even though there was free speech, there wasn't that capacity for people to speak out, and that went to our detriment in more recent times. But we still have that ingrained capacity of being slightly homogeneous. I think the battle's lost with Twitter and social media for free speech because they're private companies and they're not going to allow anything that could damage them.
No, exactly.
My view. I think that's a lost cause. I look at like the room of requirements in interesting enough, the 7th floor of I think in Hogwarts is that's the only space that Dumbledore's army could go to practice, defensive magic against Voldemort. And it was the only place where no one else knew what was going on. And my view on free speech is that often, you can have free speech in small communities, in trusted groups with friends and stuff like that. But I think the battle is lost at the kind of city square element. And that's me being somewhat defeatist, which is kind of, I suppose, where I am. I think that battle has been lost, and I think it was lost since 9/11, in my view. Where there's this horrible, well, not horrible, but this interesting paradox between being a good person and being a good person who believes in democracy. And those two, it's always beware a good man coming with good ideals. Because he knows he's good, and they think he protects his good. But
yes,
that doesn't
this
mean
is the thing, isn't it? I mean, now I think it was Napoleon Hill. This, I'm pretty sure it's his book that starts with the death of somebody who was a murderer. He was public enemy number one type of thing. I can't remember his name now, but there's a shootout between him and the police in a farmhouse, and he leaves a note, and in it he explains why he shot the two policemen. I think it was two policemen. And I don't know what's going on down here. It's like somebody's trying to take the doors off. I don't know if you can hear that. So what he says is, he explains that he was in the car with and this is obviously come back to the 1930s. So in America, he was in the car, and he and his girlfriend were disturbed by a policeman. And there was some argument occurred, and it ended up with this policeman being shot. And then obviously somebody went after him, and police went after him, and he shot them as well because there was a shootout. But it was almost like, well, that wasn't really my fault. It was in self-defense. So you look at that and you think, well, what person has ever thought that they were bad? This is the point that Napoleon Hill was saying. Who has ever considered themselves as being bad, and that what they were doing wasn't for the good of other people or the good for society in general? And you think, well, it's difficult to think of somebody who just thinks of themselves as bad. So you have got to be very cautious, as you say, people that think they're doing something. They're good people, and they're doing it.
I don't know whether or not I'm a good man, but I know that I can see things for what they are, and I think that does me some justice. It's that tricky thing, I always find people like Just Stop Oil, or the people who take direct action for climate change, rather interesting, because effectively they're doing the right thing. I mean, we're a finite planet with finite resources. I mean, and we have a situation with climate change which is kind of going off into dangerous territory. But I find that when I see them and I see them protesting, I often wonder, is this more about letting something out rather than actually making a point about something? And I think those things can be absolutely valid. They can exist. I'm not a pseudo skeptic rationalist, like saying that you shouldn't be able to hold two contrary thoughts inside your head. Well, hello, welcome to the human race population, 8 billion, or 7 billion. But I think often people forget that sometimes that both critiques are valid. And in a sense, when you are going out to do good, you probably will do good, but you also might do bad as well, because it's that kind of philosophical thing, is no true intrinsic act can be totally void of personal self-gain.
Or somebody's going to get hurt somewhere, or something's going to get hurt along the way. Yeah, totally agree. it's not possible to, so there's a metaphor. It's, as soon as the sun shines, something is cast in shadow. You can't. You got to get everything's got to be balanced. But it's not even balanced, is it? It's just got to be. Lots of things have got to be happening. Because even when you say things are in balance, it's not that at all.
No.
There is a sort of an equilibrium that comes out of the chaos.
Yeah.
Of everything doing its own thing. Seemingly cool stuff. So what I was going to say, what plans have you got? But I mean, you don't have to have any.
I think
I know you've got this thing going in June. This is like an open day at the farm, isn't it?
I think that's more of a personal kind of thing that we're doing with a group of friends more than I
Yeah.
do.
No, I'm just trying to, because you've got these other things that are going on apart from this.
Many things going on.
Yes, I know you do. I know you do.
Yeah, we're working hard here in North Wales. We're doing stuff, we're planning stuff, and things might be happening soon. It's that I was thinking about this last night about what is my place here, what am I doing here, and what's my plan, which effectively is the question. I think, because I've done the whole political thing, and I am at this point now where, there's a Christy Moore song called Lingo Political, which I think you probably need to have a Google. But you reach a point where you recognize that the only thing you can do is not make divides, it's build bridges. It's build connections, and hopefully they do something. Open up the capacity for that, and whatever happens after that really is God's gift, I guess. So I don't know why not God has put me here. If he has, thanks. But I'm just really doing what I'm doing, and if I'm here in a year or if I'm gone in a year, well, that's okay, I guess. Still got plenty of books, still have an pension, I guess. So I have to be traveling in Europe, so it's not a problem to me now. So.
That's it. Well, that's fine. At least you can console yourself with the passport situation, which is not. It's not something that we can.
Wine.
Yes. Yeah, I know. I've got a friend who lives in France, and we sort of went over to pay him a visit, and we thought, why would you come back? I mean, it's lovely. It's just the wine and the cheese was enough to just sort of think, oh my goodness. Yes, exactly. Awesome stuff. Right, we've been chatting for an hour. It's really cool.
Cool.
I know.
Yeah.
That's good. That's awesome. Yeah, so thanks for that. Really good. Really thought-provoking. It's really, I think it's the sort of thing that I know there's a lot of people that I teach because of the way I teach, I think they start thinking about, oh my goodness, my world's falling apart now. I thought I'd just come to learn the guitar, but I've just realised. But I think this whole thing of, looking at the world from a slightly different perspective is really good, and about how things of questioning yourself and what you do, and the rest of it is really important. So yeah, so all the best with everything.
All right.
Hopefully, I'm hoping at some point to visit Wales and do something about this book. So that'd be nice if I can. I'm still wrestling with that at the moment, so we'll see.
You don't need to wrestle. You just need to come. That's all.
Yeah. Good stuff. All right then. Speak to you soon.
Yeah.